The morning rush at Gate 42 unfolded like a well-orchestrated symphony of motion and sound. Overhead, the tannoy crackled into life at irregular intervals, its clipped announcements guiding passengers in clipped, practiced tones. Now boarding Group 3, Economy Class, Flight UA 427 to Denver. Please have your boarding passes and photo IDs ready. Each time the PA fell silent, an echo lingered in the high-ceilinged terminal, quickly drowned out by the steady clatter of rolling suitcases. Wheels clicking against polished tile in a syncopated rhythm that alternated between staccato bursts and long, low hums. Here and there, luggage carts groaned under the weight of stacked cases, their brakes squealing as attendants navigated through the crowd. The air carried a faint undercurrent of jet fuel mixed with the comforting aroma of freshly brewed coffee wafting from a cafe kiosk just yards away. Baristas in crisp black aprons pulled espresso shots and steamed milk, their machines hissing and gurgling like miniature steam engines. Cups clinked against saucers, steaming mugs were stamped with logos and set onto trays, then whisked away by travel-stained hands eager for a caffeine boost. Scattered clusters of travelers dotted the seating area. Business people hunched over laptops, their faces lit by screens. Tourists in floral shirts fanned themselves, thick guidebooks spread across laps, and families corralling restless children, their laughter and squawks weaving through the general din. A flight attendant in navy blue brushed past, clipboard in hand, pausing to adjust the closure of a gate door before making her way down the jet bridge to greet incoming passengers. Beyond the windows, a gleaming fuselage waited, its polished metal gleaming under the high bay lights, a silent promise of departure. And amidst it all, a soft ripple of anticipation, the collective sense that any second now, everything could shift. The board might flicker with new information, the engines might roar to life, or a single exchange might ignite a cascade of consequences no one could foresee. At the very edge of that current of commotion stood Emily Thompson, 16 years old and traveling alone for the first time. She wore a light denim jacket over a simple white t-shirt, faded jeans rolled up at the ankles, and scuffed sneakers that had seen better days. Her long, ash-blonde hair was pulled into a loose ponytail, strands escaping to frame a pale, freckled face. Wide blue eyes darted between the departure board and the gate agents. The board, with its rows of alphanumeric codes and blinking indicators, was like a living thing, giving life to hopes or snuffing them out with equal indifference. Emily's lips were pressed into a thin line as she scanned the scrolling display for UA 427. Searching for the familiar grouping of letters and numbers that would signal she was on her way. A flutter of anxiety settled in her stomach as she noted the estimated departure time inching ever closer. She clasped the strap of her pale pink backpack, fingertips brushing the zipper pull of the front pocket where her mother's letter and a small packet of tissues were tucked away. The tang of fear was sharp on her tongue as memories of boarding school farewells turned into a knot of homesickness in her chest. Every few seconds, the buzzer of her phone vibrated with messages from her mother. "You'll do great, sweetheart. Text me when you're safe. Remember to breathe." Emily swallowed hard, but the lump in her throat only tightened. She glanced again at the coffee kiosk, willing herself to step forward and order a latte. Anything to steady her nerves. Yet her feet remained planted, as if the logic of deep breaths and hot drinks had abandoned her. All around her, the terminal seemed to pulse with purpose. A family to her left piled their carry-ons into the overhead bin of an arriving flight. A pilot in polished black shoes strode through, sharp-eyed and brisk. A janitor on roller shoes swept the concourse, tipping his cap to passing travelers. The ceiling's skylights let in shafts of pale sunlight that danced across the floor. Voices overlapped in a wash of foreign accents and hurried English, snippets of Spanish, Mandarin, French, Arabic. Amid that tapestry of sound, Emily felt exceptionally small, a single note in a chord too complex to discern. And yet, in that moment of solitary unease, her presence was anything but insignificant. She embodied the innocence and vulnerability of youth in a world defined by schedules and security checks, by policies and profit margins. She stood as a reminder that behind every boarding pass was a story, a pair of trembling hands, a heart beating fast with expectation or dread. In just a few minutes, she would step across that threshold of the boarding line, handing over her ticket to a stranger in a crisp vest. In that simple transaction lay the power to shift destinies, not just hers, but that of an empire. For now, though, she was still on the threshold, suspended between departure and arrival, between the comforting buzz of the airport and the unknown that awaited her on the other side of the gate. How could one small moment, a misread ticket, a curt word, a hushed phone call, set off a chain reaction powerful enough to crumble everything those polished jets and gleaming terminals represented? How could a single spark in this symphony of sounds and scents ignite a firestorm that would topple an entire airline empire? Colleen Briggs appeared as if summoned by Emily's unease, a crisp figure moving with swift purpose through the swirl of travelers. She was in her late 20s, her dark hair pulled back into a tight chignon that emphasized the sharp lines of her cheekbones. Buttoned navy blazer snug at the waist, skirt falling just below the knee, and patent leather pumps whose heels clicked an urgent staccato on the tile floor. Colleen looked every inch the consumer professional. In one hand she carried a clipboard, its surface crowded with printouts of passenger manifests and last-minute gate changes. In the other, a headset coiled around her slender fingers. Her polished nails were painted a muted gray, an unspoken nod to the airline's color scheme, and her name tag glinted beneath the harsh terminal lights. She halted abruptly in front of Emily, as though bumping into her were part of the plan. Colleen's brow furrowed, lips compressed in a thin line that brooked no argument. She pointed a manicured finger at the space just beyond the velvet rope, a 4-foot rope strung between polished chrome stanchions that marked the entrance to the jet bridge. "You can't stand here," she snapped, her voice pitched to carry over the ambient noise of rolling suitcases and distant announcement. Emily's heart lurched. Her rosy cheeks drained of color, and her wide blue eyes flickered between the rope and the woman who towered over her in those stiletto heels. She opened her mouth, ready to protest. I'm in Group 3. My boarding pass says..." But Colleen cut her off without a second's hesitation. She leveled the clipboard like a judge's gavel. "Show me your ticket or I'll call security." There was no warmth in her tone, no question, only a rigid command. Around them, the terminal kept moving. A businessman to Emily's right shifted his briefcase from one hand to the other, his eyes glued to his smartphone. A teenager with headphones and a canvas backpack scrolled through Instagram, oblivious. A mother of two glanced up, considered intervening, then sighed and turned back to soothe her fussy toddler. Not one person stepped forward to help. Emily fumbled for her boarding pass, her fingers trembling so badly that the little slip of paper almost slipped through her grasp. She searched her backpack's front pocket, drawn like a moth to the dim glow of overhead lights. In her panic, she thought of her mother's last text, "You're stronger than you think." She shook her head, willing herself to be brave, to stand tall. At last, she produced the ticket. UA 427, Group 3, Seat 21C. Colleen snatched it from Emily's hand, eyes scanning it as if the fine print spelled out a crime. Her lips curled in a small, disdainful smirk. "Economy class," she said, her voice almost too soft to carry, though somehow every passenger within earshot heard it. "This line is for first-class boarding only." But Emily began, and in that moment her voice cracked, betraying the frustration and fear coiled in her chest. Colleen's smirk widened. She tapped the ticket with a nail. "You must have your group called. Please return to the end of the queue, otherwise security will escort you out." Emily's shoulders slumped. She backed away, but the barrier between her and the waiting jet bridge seemed to stretch farther with every heartbeat. The velvet rope loomed like a barrier between innocence and humiliation. A low murmur rippled through the small crowd, but there was no outrage, only the hum of acceptance. A pilot in crisp uniform strolled by, stopping only to clear his throat politely, then moved on. A janitor on roller skates swept past, sweeping up popcorn kernels dropped by an earlier movie showing in a nearby lounge. No one challenged Colleen. In that instant, Emily felt an icy flush of shame. A single tear slid down her cheek and she brushed it away hastily, not wanting anyone to see her cry. But tears were pointless. They would not change Colleen's mind, nor would they breach the wall of indifference that had settled over the gate. Colleen tucked the boarding pass back into her clipboard folder and turned on her heel, as though the incident were already forgotten. Just another minor blip in her meticulously timed schedule. Her heels clicked once more, then twice, as she strode away to attend to other duties, leaving Emily stranded in a current of judgmental stares and a sea of apathy. Emily stood alone, her knuckles white where she still clutched the strap of her backpack. The aroma of coffee drifted past her, rich and sweet, but it could not calm the storm inside her. She couldn't understand why no one had spoken up, why no kind face had offered a reassuring smile. In the airport's bustling hive, every traveler was too wrapped up in their own plans, their own stress, their own world. The injustice of it all settled like lead in her stomach. She took a deep breath, a shaky, uneven draft of air, and wondered how one single word, one dismissive command could fracture her sense of security so completely. How could a moment this small ripple outward and strike at the heart of an entire airline empire? How could the cold indifference of strangers serve as the spark that lit a firestorm none of them saw coming? As Emily turned away from the gate, gathering herself to rejoin the boarding line at the back, the terminal lights gleamed off the polished tile like distant stars. Somewhere beyond the doors, the plane waited on the tarmac, and though Emily could not have known it then, she was carrying with her more than a boarding pass. She was carrying the weight of a story that would soon unfold far beyond this jet bridge, one that would shake the foundations of the very airline that sought to erase her so thoughtlessly. Emily's fingers trembled as she slipped her hand into the front pocket of her backpack. The terminal's din, the rumble of rolling suitcases, the distant hum of engines taxiing, the buzz of fluorescent lights overhead, seemed to recede into a soft blur. In that narrowing tunnel of sound, all Emily could hear was the thump of her own heart and the faint whir of her phone vibrating against fabric. She withdrew it with deliberate care, a slim silver rectangle that had already felt both lifeline and burden since morning. She flipped it open, and for a moment her breath caught at the sight of her mother's smiling wallpaper photo, a sunlit snapshot of the two of them on last summer's beach vacation, arms wrapped around each other's shoulders. Emily's throat tightened. She blinked back a sudden surge of tears. But there was no time, no room for tears here. She had to act. With a calm that surprised even herself, she tapped contacts, scrolled past the rows of names until she found the one she needed most: Mom, Home. Beneath it, in smaller font, Dad, Office. The labels felt absurdly formal, as if her whole life could be contained in those neat parentheses. She pressed her thumb on Mom. Silence. The terminal noises pressed in again. A flight announcement murmured overhead, its words indistinct. A barista's espresso machine hissed from 2 gates down. A child's laugh cut sharply through the air. But Emily held herself still. Her lips formed silent words. "Please pick up. Please pick up," as the call rang on. Across the gate area, Colleen Briggs paused mid-stride. She'd turned away after sending Emily back to the end of the line, heels clicking with self-satisfied authority. But something about the way Emily's shoulders stiffened, something in her posture, taut and unwavering, pulled Colleen's attention back. She glanced over her shoulder, expecting perhaps one last whimper of apology or retreating shuffle. Instead, she saw Emily standing as though rooted to the spot, inscrutable, phone pressed to her ear. Colleen allowed herself a small, triumphant smile. She lifted her chin and shook her head, thinking, "That's right, stay there." The clipboard rested against her hip, a shield and a symbol of power. In her mind, the scene was closed. The insubordinate teenager had been corralled. Her family would soon hurry her along, and no one would question the airline's strict rules. Satisfied, Colleen spun on her heel and continued her rounds, disappearing into the stream of passengers flowing toward another gate. But to any onlooker who lingered a moment longer, the tableau carried an undercurrent of unsettled tension. Emily's silhouette, backlit by the wide glass windows overlooking the tarmac, looked almost heroic in its stillness. An unlikely figure standing defiantly against an army of uniformed personnel and indifferent travelers. Her clenched jaw, the way her shoulders squared as she listened intently, spoke of more than a simple phone call. It hinted at plans being laid, at alliances being called in across invisible lines. The ringing tone ended. Emily pressed the phone tighter against her ear and spoke in a hushed, urgent voice. "Mom, I need you to listen carefully. Something's happened here. I've been held up at gate 42, but no, it's worse than that." Her eyes flicked up to the gate's overhead sign, where UA 427 now glowed steadily, ready for boarding. "I'll explain when I see you, but right now you need to do exactly as I say." On the other end, her mother's voice crackled with concern. Emily's pulse hammered as she heard frantic whispers of reassurance and questions, but inside she felt a strange calm coiling around her. A determination fueled by fear, yes, but also by righteous indignation. The injustice she'd just endured had lit a spark. Now, that spark was feeding something far larger than her own embarrassment. She ended the call with a single word, "Thank you," and slid the phone shut. It clicked off, and the terminal's ambient roar returned in full force. Far from finding relief in the restored noise, Emily welcomed the clamor. It masked her next move. She stepped forward to the velvet rope barrier once more, eyes fixed on a quiet knot in the chrome stanchion. Her fingers curled around it, and with a decisive tug she released the rope and let it swing back toward the empty side. The sudden slack in the barrier produced a slight tss sound, almost lost amidst the other terminal noises, but it felt like an exclamation point. Passengers glanced over, some startled, some annoyed, but none intervened. They saw only a teenager reclaiming her place in line. No one could know the weight of that simple act. Emily tucked the rope under her arm as she slipped past, sliding back into the first-class boarding queue. She refused to meet any eyes. She refused to show a flicker of triumph. Instead, she walked with measured steps, each one a note in a symphony of silent rebellion. Behind her, Colleen's clipped voice drifted back. "Excuse me, young lady." But Emily paid no heed. She reached into her pocket for her boarding pass and presented it to the agent. Her hands steady now, every tremor replaced by a thrum of purpose. The agent glanced at her, blinked once, then scanned the barcode. A green light flashed and the agent smiled. Reserved, polite, unaware of the larger scheme unfurling. "Welcome aboard, Ms. Thompson." Emily offered a faint nod and picked up her small carry-on bag. As she stepped across the threshold of the jet bridge, she cast one last glance over her shoulder. She saw Colleen, arms crossed, lips parted in shock, as if she had just realized something crucial too late. More importantly, Emily saw the faces of the other passengers. A mix of curiosity and irritation, but also something else, an unspoken question, a crack in their armor of indifference. In that instant, the conflict seemed to resolve itself. The rightful boarding pass accepted, the teenager restored to her place. The audience, that indifferent throng of business travelers and vacationers, exhaled collectively, perhaps believing they had witnessed the end of a small drama. The boarding door clanged shut behind Emily, and the terminal reopened its steady pulse. Yet beneath the surface calm, currents shifted. Emily's silent phone call had set gears in motion far beyond Gate 42. It had summoned unseen allies, triggered protocols, and drawn attention to a single act of prejudice. The Empire, so confident in its rules and routines, had just taken its first hit. What only a few had noticed in that fleeting moment would soon unravel policies, engage media scrutiny, and ignite a movement that no airport announcement could quell. For now, though, the only sign that anything extraordinary was underway was the faint throb in Emily's chest. A reminder that sometimes the quietest acts of defiance carry the greatest power. And as the jet bridge hummed beneath her steps, she carried with her not only a boarding pass, but the promise of a reckoning yet to come. Camilla Rhodes came into view like a tide turning. She emerged from the throng of passengers at the far end of the jet bridge, the spectrum of her authority palpable even before she spoke. Clad in a charcoal gray pantsuit tailored to perfection, the 45-year-old vice president of customer experience moved with deliberate urgency. Her espresso brown hair was swept into a sleek chignon at the nape of her neck, and a single strand, silver at the temple, glinted under the harsh overhead lights. In one hand, she carried a slim tablet. In the other, she held her cell phone so tightly her knuckles whitened. Flanking her were two internal security officers, one tall, broad-shouldered with a buzz cut and wire-rimmed glasses, the other shorter but equally imposing, his dark suit jacket unbuttoned to reveal the holstered radio at his hip. Neither man spoke. They simply moved with an almost militaristic precision, scanning the crowd and Camilla's like. Their presence added weight to Camilla's démarche. This was no routine check-in. As the three of them neared, passengers at the front of the boarding line noticed the subtle shift. A banker in a crisp pinstriped suit glanced over his shoulder, sensing a disturbance in the terminal's choreography. A tourist clutching a city map paused in mid-sentence, eyes flicking back and forth between Emily and the newcomers. Even the hushed chatter of the gate agents faltered. Camilla stepped into the small clearing, laying her tablet against her hip. She inhaled deeply and then, in a voice both calm and authoritative, addressed Emily first, as though she were greeting a valued guest rather than a girl who had just been humiliated. "Miss Thompson?" She began, locking eyes with Emily in a gesture meant to convey sincerity. "I want to apologize, on behalf of our airline, for what you've just endured." The words rippled through the crowd. Emily, still clutching her carry-on, felt her heart stutter. She had braced herself for resistance, for silence, even for further insults. She had not expected an apology. The tight knot in her chest loosened, just enough for her to draw in a tentative breath. At that moment, Camilla pivoted her gaze to Colleen Briggs. "Colleen," she said, firm but not harsh, "step aside." Colleen's face went ashen. The vibrant confidence she had worn like armor dissolved in an instant. Her shoulders slumped, her lips parted in a silent "oh," as if she had never imagined being called out so publicly. She opened her mouth, perhaps to protest, but no words came. The two security officers closed in on either side of her, one gently guiding her by the elbow, the other forming a silent barrier between her and Emily. Passengers shifted in their seats, the atmosphere crackling with sudden attention. The man with the briefcase lowered his phone. The teen in the hoodie yanked off his headphones. The mother with the fussy toddler paused mid-soothe. Eyes that had been trained on screens and papers now fixated on the scene unfolding at Gate 42. A low murmur rose, then a hush. as though the crowd collectively realized they were witnessing something extraordinary. Some leaned forward, jaws slack with disbelief. Others exchanged glances, astonishment laced with a dawning realization that Emily was not the one at fault. The symmetry of justice, laid bare in Camila's intervention, struck them with piercing clarity. For Emily, time seemed to dilate. She felt each heartbeat reverberate in her ears, each inhalation magnified. Her palms were damp against her bag's handle, but her posture straightened. The fear that had shadowed her since Colleen's first command receded, replaced by a quiet astonishment and a small, bright ember of vindication. Camilla turned back to Emily, offering her hand. "Please," she said, voice softening, "come with me. We'll make sure you board without further trouble." Emily nodded, lips parting to say thank you, but her voice felt lodged in her throat. Instead, she stepped forward and placed her hand in Camilla's, a gesture both simple and profound. At her back, the two security officers gently guided Colleen a few paces away, out of the immediate glare. Now that Camilla had spoken, the crowd's demeanor had irrevocably changed. Sympathy for Emily rippled outward. A woman in a silk scarf offered Emily a small, encouraging smile. A bespectacled man shifted so that Emily's path was cleared, as though he regretted ever having looked away. Even the gate agent, who a moment earlier had seemed merely bored by the whole affair, now stood at attention, scanning Emily's boarding pass with renewed respect. In that suspended second, the power dynamic reversed. Colleen, once the embodiment of airline authority, stood muted, her uniform a mute testament to the cruelty of unchecked power. Meanwhile, Camilla's calm command had transformed Emily into the passenger worth defending, the vulnerable individual worthy of apology. As they moved toward the open doorway of the aircraft, Emily glanced back at the tableau she left behind. Camilla offered a reassuring nod, and Emily gave the tiniest of smiles in return. Tentative but real. The jet bridge hummed beneath their feet, a low mechanical purr that now sounded less threatening and more like a promise of forward motion. Once inside, Camilla shepherded Emily down the aisle, the soft overhead lights beneath the fuselage giving the cabin a gentle glow. 2 seats were already cleared in a quiet corner of first class, plush and reserved just for her. As Emily settled into the wide leather chair, the rush of adrenaline dimmed to a steady warmth. Camilla bent to meet her at eye level, placing a comforting hand on Emily's shoulder. "Take your time," Camilla said, voice warm. "Would you like some water?" "Anything at all?" Emily exhaled, the tension in her shoulders softening. "Water, please," she managed, her voice husky but steady. Camilla signaled to a nearby attendant, who appeared with a chilled glass and a gentle smile. As she lifted the glass to her lips, Emily thought back to the cold clang of Colleen's words and the clammy ache of her own panic. Now, in this cocoon of quiet luxury and compassion, Emily felt the weight of that moment and the larger forces it had set in motion. Below them, the airport terminal continued its relentless rhythm, but Gate 42 would never be quite the same. In that brief public reckoning, passengers had glimpsed the fragility of blind obedience and the power of a single apology. And as the engines roared to life, ready to propel the plane and Emily's story across the skies, she knew that the true journey had only just begun. By mid-morning, the brief but explosive confrontation at Gate 42 had already found its way onto social media. An onlooker, an off-duty teacher in a navy blazer, had raised her smartphone and captured the moment Colleen Briggs barked at Emily Thompson. Within seconds, the video was uploaded to X, TikTok, and Instagram Reels under the hashtag Gate42. Shame. The clip opened on Colleen's rigid posture, clipboard raised like a cudgel. Her voice cracked through the tinny microphone. "Show me your ticket or I'll call security." It lingered in the air, each syllable a hammer blow. The camera panned to Emily's pale face, shock giving way to trembling resolve, then to Colleen's satisfied smirk. The uploader added a caption, "This is how they treat minors in first class. Boycott Global United." Within 60 seconds, the views skyrocketed, thousands per minute. The terminal's free Wi-Fi network strained under the flood of passengers refreshing their feeds. Overhead, the airport's digital billboards briefly displayed a loop of flight info, but most travelers had their eyes glued to personal screens. A businessman in a charcoal suit scrolled through the live stream, eyebrows knitting in anger as he replayed Colleen's words for the third time. A young couple in matching backpacks nudged each other, thumbs tapping the screen to slow motion the moment Colleen raised her finger. All around Gate 42, phones were lifted in unison, as if an invisible director had called action. A cluster of passengers by the coffee kiosk gathered in a tight semicircle, mouths open as they watched on tabletops and iPads perched on rolling luggage handles. The barista's steam wand hissed into the background, but no one cared about lattes anymore. The airport had become an amphitheater, and everyone was watching the same viral show. Some faces registered righteous indignation. A retiree with silver hair clenched his jaw, muttering, "Unbelievable." A teenager with a neon green tote bag shook her head, lips parted in disbelief. She's 16. Even the pilot, who'd once strode past, now lingered by the glass wall, cupping his phone to catch the audio through his headset. For the first time that morning, the hum of engines seemed distant, irrelevant. In the back offices of Gate 42, an alarm pinged on the security monitoring screen. Douglas Reeves, Global United's head of security, had been reviewing CCTV footage of a luggage mishap when a junior analyst tapped him on the shoulder. "Sir, you might want to see this." Reeves leaned in as the analyst shared the social media link. On screen, Colleen's sharp command replayed endlessly, the view count climbing by the thousands each passing second. Reeves felt the blood drain from his face. He watched as comments poured in. "Disgraceful. My grandmother would be embarrassed. I'm never flying this airline again." And then the one word that cut deepest, boycott. It blinked on his dashboard in red letters, 50K mentions in the last 5 minutes. His heart pounded. A hashtag trending globally could cost millions in ticket sales, not to mention the inevitable PR nightmare. He jabbed at his phone. "Gimme Brian Holt, now." The guards outside Gate 42 exchanged nervous glances as Reeves slipped out of the staff corridor. He nearly ran across the polished concourse, weaving between travelers whose heads were bowed to screens. His polished black shoes squeaked against the tile. An uncharacteristic squeal that echoed the panic in his mind. Upstairs, in the executive suite, Brian Holt, a tall man with salt and pepper hair and a reputation for calm under pressure, was midway through a board meeting. He was reviewing quarterly projections when his assistant burst in, phone in hand, eyes wide. "Brian, it's bad. The video at Gate 42, it's gone viral. They're calling for a boycott." Holt's chest tightened. He excused himself with a single nod and strode to his office. The assistant scrolled through the live feed on the conference room monitor, showing Colleen's voice still ringing across social media. Holt inhaled sharply, fingers tapping the oak desk. In over 30 years in aviation, he'd seen missteps, but never this kind of public relations implosion. On his desk, his own phone buzzed insistently. He answered with clipped efficiency. "Douglas, what's the situation?" Reeves's voice came through, shaky. "Sir, the clip is everywhere. Gate 42 staff are overwhelmed. Passengers are filming, posting. The hashtag Boycott Global United is trending in 3 countries already. We're fielding at least 50 calls per minute in security, and gate agents are locked down. We've had to divert resources from every terminal." Holt pinched the bridge of his nose. He could hear the static of airport announcements bleeding through the line, the same one that had serenaded Emily's ordeal only minutes before. He closed his eyes for a moment, weighing his next move. "Douglas, do everything you can to contain this," he said, voice low but firm. "Isolate Colleen, get her off the public schedule. I want a full headcount of staff at Gate 42 and immediate statements from our VP of Customer Experience. Call Camila Rhodes? She needs to do damage control on camera." Reeves exhaled. "Yes, sir. I'm on it." Holt hung up and turned to his team, who had followed him into the office in stunned silence. He pointed at the screen displaying the swirling sea of social media posts. "We're in a crisis," he said. "Not just a minor incident at a gate. Public trust is at stake. I want every department mobilized: security, PR, legal, customer experience, and I want a plan on my desk within the hour." Back at Gate 42, the mood had shifted palpably. Where moments before passengers had been silently outraged, now they felt emboldened. A group of 3 middle-aged women filmed themselves responding to the video, each condemning Colleen's behavior, pledging never to book on Global United again. A handful of business travelers quoted the boycott hashtag, debating whether to change their flights mid-journey. The terminal's ambient buzz had morphed into an electric undercurrent of collective action. In the crowd, a freelance journalist tapped away at her laptop, drafting a scathing post for her personal blog. A local news crew set up by the coffee shop, their camera lights bathing flyers and carry-ons in harsh glare as they interviewed shocked witnesses. A middle school teacher recorded a short TikTok rant, calling the incident the perfect teaching moment about power and prejudice. Somewhere in the swirl of reaction, Emily Thompson sat in first class, oblivious to the chaos she had ignited. Camila Rhodes checked her watch and exchanged a look with the lead flight attendant. They understood that today's scheduled departure would be indefinitely delayed, not because of mechanical issues on the tarmac, but because the airline's reputation had taken off in all the wrong ways. As Holt's orders rippled down through the airport's hierarchy, the wheels were set in motion for a public apology, likely a press conference to be held within the hour, with the CEO, the VP of Customer Experience, and even Emily herself as the reluctant focal point. The PR department was already drafting statements. Legal was reviewing policies. Security was preparing to escort Colleen off duty before she could speak to any reporters. In the distance, Flight UA 427's departure time flickered closer to 0. Engines idled on the runway, passengers boarded through another gate, and the relentless cycle of departures and arrivals continued. Yet at Gate 42, beneath the polished glass and gleaming chrome, something far more consequential was unfolding. A single moment of injustice, recorded on a handheld device, had detonated into a full-scale crisis, one that would test the airline's integrity, its leadership, and the power of one young girl's silent act of defiance. The boardroom lay in near total darkness when Brian Holt's assistant flicked on the recessed spotlights above the long mahogany table. A hush fell over the gathered executives. General counsel, finance, PR, operations, each one shuffling papers, clearing throats, glancing at their glowing phones. At the head of the table, CEO Brian Holt stood, fingers steepled in front of him. His salt and pepper hair caught the light. The lines at the corners of his eyes were deeper than usual. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice low but carrying in the silence, "we are at a crossroads." He paused, letting the weight of those words settle. In the last hour, the video from Gate 42 has gone global. Tens of thousands of people have seen Colleen Briggs verbally assault a minor. The hashtag Boycott Global United is trending in multiple markets. Our ticket sales are down, and there's chatter of regulatory investigations into discrimination. He set his briefcase gently on the table. We have 2 choices. We can attempt to contain the fallout, quietly pull resources, settle with Emily Thompson, reassign Colleen, issue a holding statement, and hope the story dies down. Or we can stand up, own this mistake, publicly apologize. launch an immediate external audit of our customer service protocols, and face whatever investigations come. A murmur rippled around the room. Holt nodded once. I want honest input. What's your recommendation? Finance Director Karen Liu tapped the table. Sir, from a pure numbers standpoint, the quiet contain approach costs us least up front. A confidential settlement with Emily and her family, likely a six-figure sum, plus severance for the gate staff, a brief statement to press, and we're back in business by Monday. Our bond ratings won't budge, and the stock impact should be minimal. General Counsel Marcus Patel raised an eyebrow. But if regulators smell a cover-up, we risk punitive fines that could dwarf that settlement. Plus, the DOJ is already monitoring airlines for civil rights compliance. If they see us sweeping this under the rug, they will investigate and slow-walk any future mergers or acquisitions. PR Chief Denise Mendoza leaned forward. The market is demanding authenticity. Customers, especially younger demographics, are less forgiving of opaque corporate behavior. If we go behind closed doors, we'll look tone-deaf. The social media backlash could be prolonged. A full apology and transparency on procedures might actually rebuild trust faster. Operations VP Larry Green shifted in his seat. I get that, Denise, but real operations disruptions are mounting. Our gates are backed up right now because passengers are switching flights mid-itinerary. If we drag this out in a press conference, we're going to lose more revenue than we can calculate in this room. Brian Holt held up a hand. Thank you, but there's a third voice here whose opinion matters most. He tapped his cell phone. Instantly, the double doors swung open and Leonard Walsh strode in, lean, impeccably dressed, exuding the quiet force of someone accustomed to getting what he wanted. As the airline's largest shareholder, Walsh owned nearly 8% of outstanding shares and had the ear of half Wall Street. He laid a folder on the table and flipped it open to reveal hastily scribbled notes and a printout of the trending metrics. I don't care about your battle of spreadsheets and internal memos, he began in a clipped, no-nonsense tone. I care about share price and liquidity. Right now, we're hemorrhaging both. We need immediate action. No more listening sessions or transparency initiatives. I want an emergency trigger. Pull dividend, secure a fresh capital injection, and activate crisis management protocols that include a full asset-light strategy. If we don't show decisive moves on the balance sheet, my hedge fund is out. A hush fell again. Holt felt the room tilt. He could almost hear the tick of investors reassessing their holdings. He met Walsh's steely gaze. You're asking for a liquidity event? Essentially a temporary wind down? I'm asking you to pull the plug on complacency. Walsh stood and began pacing, the echoes of his Prada loafers punctuating his words. Public apologies are great for optics, but they don't fix balance sheets. If the market smells weakness, every activist investor in the world senses an opportunity to pounce. Either we show financial strength now, or we'll be taken apart piece by piece. Marcus Patel cleared his throat. Leonard, with respect, your proposal skirts dangerously close to fund misallocation. Diverting capital from operations and customer experience improvements to shore up the P&L might backfire, emboldening regulators to intensify scrutiny when they see A-list investors calling the shots. Karen Liu tapped her pen. Also, remember that creditor covenants may restrict a dividend suspension or emergency capital shift without board approval from multiple committees. Walsh stopped pacing and fixed his glare on them. Then do your jobs. Get those approvals in the next 48 hours, otherwise, I'll take this to court. He snapped the folder shut and strode to the door, pausing only to say over his shoulder, Decisions, gentlemen. And lady. Time is money. Then he was gone, leaving stunned silence. Brian Holt took a slow breath. He felt the pressure of every set of eyes on him, and beneath that, the thousands of passengers, shareholders, regulators, and millions of viewers around the world waiting for a response. "We have a crisis," he said quietly, "that is equally legal, financial, and moral. I propose we meet the shareholders' demands for financial stability, but only if we simultaneously commit to full transparency." Denise Mendoza leaned in. "I can draft a dual arrangement statement, announce an independent audit of our customer service practices, commit to funding diversity and inclusion training with a $10 million 0 cents community fund, and simultaneously announce a temporary dividend suspension to be revisited in Q3. That shows both moral accountability and financial responsibility." Larry Green nodded slowly. "That buys time operationally. Our gates can stabilize, and we can resume normal service with minimal further flight cancellations." Marcus Patel added, "Legal can prepare the audit terms and compliance safeguards now. We'll protect against overreach by regulators while demonstrating bona fides." Taryn Liu pointed out, "We'll need board approval by noon tomorrow, and we'll have to convene a special shareholders teleconference. But the dual-track plan is feasible." Brian Holt closed his eyes for a heartbeat, then opened them with resolve. "All right, Denise, work with legal on that statement. Karen, line up the board approvals. Marcus, oversee the audit parameters. Larry, coordinate with operations to maintain service levels. We execute on all fronts." He leaned forward and pressed his palms to the table. "We're not going to cover this up, and we're not going to seek control of our finances to panic. We'll face our mistakes head on, and we'll show the world our company can do better, both in the cabin and on the balance sheet." The table erupted into a flurry of activity as phones were whipped out, notes taken, emails composed. Holt sat back, breathing deeply, aware that the next 24 hours would define Global United's future. Outside, the hum of the airport carried on, passengers unaware that, behind those double doors, the very soul of an aviation empire was being tested. The moment the Global United crisis seemed to be stabilizing, another storm broke, this time from Washington, D.C. At 2:17 p.m. local time, Martin Blake, director of the FAA's Office of Passenger Protection, peered at the blinking console in his high-security operations center. His brow furrowed as he reviewed the rapidly growing dossier of public complaints, social media metrics, and legal memos the agency had pulled together in the last 90 minutes. "Summon them," he growled into the secure line. "We need every file on the Thompson incident, internal reports, video footage, complaint logs, training manuals, everything." Within moments, Global United's General Counsel, Marcus Patel, received the summons on his encrypted phone. FAA Directive 14 CFR SS 121.573. Provide full documentation of complaint UA 4127 within 2 hours. FAA reserves the right to issue an emergency order grounding all Global United aircraft under 14 CFR SS 1021.589 if cooperation is not complete. Patel's heart sank. He knew the code. 121.589 authorized the FAA to immediately suspend an air carrier's operating certificate in the event of safety or compliance concerns. Although the current dispute seemed purely about customer service, the FAA's threat was unmistakable and unilateral. Back in the boarding lounge of Gate 42, the digital departure board flickered ominously. Rows of green on-time indicators suddenly blinked out, replaced line by line with stark red letters, "Canceled." Each switch drew a collective gasp from hundreds of stranded travelers. Luggage trolleys ground to a halt, coffee cups tipped in hands. A pregnant mother in a flowing dress clutched her smartphone as her flight to Chicago vanished before her eyes. At the operations center at Global United's headquarters, alarms shrieked. Security cameras along each terminal gate streamed the cancellations live into corporate monitors. CEO Brian Holt looked on in stunned disbelief as his chief operating officer, Larry Green, pointed to the board in horror. "They've triggered a grounding order," Green said, voice tight. "Every departure's off the books until we comply." Holt pressed his palms to his temples. Sweat beaded at his hairline despite the frigid air conditioning. "Call Blake," he barked. "Now." Within 2 rings, Martin Blake's measured voice came through. "Mr. Holt, this is Director Blake of the FAA. We've reviewed the evidence of a systemic failure in your customer service escalation protocols. While no lives are immediately at risk, we have reason to believe that your crew's lack of training and the apparent disregard for non-discrimination policies constitutes a breach of your carrier's responsibility to treat all passengers with dignity. Under 14 CFR SS 121.589, we are suspending your operating certificate effective immediately. You may submit the required documentation by 4:30 p.m. to lift the suspension." Holt's jaw clenched. "Director Blake, you're grounding my entire fleet, over 600 aircraft, for a customer service incident?" Blake's tone was rock solid. "The FAA is not in the business of policing internal HR matters, ordinarily. However, the volume of credible complaints and the potential for further reputational damage that could disrupt safe, orderly operations compels us to act. We will reassess upon receipt and review of your entire file, including your training and certification logs for frontline personnel." "Understood," Holt said through gritted teeth. He terminated the call, spun on his heels, and addressed his senior team. "We have 2 hours. Every document Marcus can get his hands on, immediately. No edits, no omissions. Engage external counsel if you must, but under no circumstances will we let this grounding order stand." As he spoke, outside the gleaming glass facade of the headquarters, commuter jet engines began their low rumble before taxiing back to the hangars. At 2:45 p.m., JFK International, Gate 42. The same canneled board here felt like lightning striking twice. Passengers who had cheered Emily's vindication now stared at screens with disbelief. A teenage boy whispered into his phone, "Mom, do we have to find another flight?" A retired couple huddled over gate agent desks, filling out paper forms by hand. The unsaid question hung in the air. How could one viral video ripple out to paralyze the global operations of a major airline? In the middle of the chaos, Camila Rhodes stood at Emily's seat, tablet in hand. She looked out the cabin door at the jammed jet bridge beyond. "I'm so sorry," she said quietly. "This is beyond any of us." Emily nodded, suddenly aware that the crisis she had set in motion had grown far larger than an apology or a policy change. She closed her eyes for a moment, then opened them with a new resolve. If the airline's entire fleet was immobilized, she thought, perhaps this moment could force deeper change than any internal memo or diversity training seminar ever would. 3:02 p.m., Global United Ops Center. Marcus Patel's office was shrouded in towering stacks of binders and printed emails. Next to him, General Counsel's paralegal scrolled through hundreds of complaint forms. "We have logs dating back to 2019, she said, voice shaking. "There are dozens of similar incidents. Passengers denied boarding unfairly, discrimination flags raised, but most were quietly settled or ignored." Patel sucked in a breath. The FAA had demanded not just the Thompson file, but a root cause analysis of how complaints were handled. He paged through a 2021 training manual on customer descalability protocols and found nothing on racial bias or non-discrimination. "This is exactly what they want," he muttered. "We've never formalized the policy." Martin Blake watched his large projection screen as the first delivery of documents from Global United's secure portal began to arrive. Dozens of zip files labeled training records, complaint logs, video evidence, LRB reports. He tapped a file and watched as the timestamp lit up. 3:29 p.m. On schedule, he murmured. He dialed his deputy, Ellen Saunders. Begin the initial compliance review, prioritize any gaps in documented non-discrimination training, and push for a preliminary report by 4:15 p.m. If it's acceptable, we'll issue a limited suspension lift, conditional on formal policy revisions and an external audit. Saunders's voice crackled through the secure line. Understood, sir. We'll run a parallel review with OHAR and legal to prepare recommendations for Commissioner McFarland. Blake leaned back in his chair. Outside, the afternoon sun slanted across the Potomac, but here in the cavernous operations floor, the only glow came from the rows of monitors displaying red X over hundreds of flight icons. They said it all. Global United grounded. The ripple from a single gate had become a tidal wave. 4:01 p.m. Global United Ops Center. Chief Operating Officer Larry Green posted a fast-moving alert on the company intranet. All staff. FAG has suspended our operating certificate. We are compiling requested documentation. Anticipate conditional lift by 6:00 p.m. All flights remain canceled until further notice. Across every department, marketing, customer service, flight ops, maintenance, phones rang non-stop. Managers hovered over workstations, coordinating with FAA liaisons via secure video channels. Ground crews were ordered to park aircraft at nearest remote stands. Flight attendants were told to stand down. Baggage handlers began rerouting thousands of bags into storage bays. In the PR bullpen, Denise Mendoza drafted a statement for commissioners and lawmakers. Global United Airlines acknowledges the FAA's action and is fully cooperating. We recognize gaps in our customer service protocols and are committed to immediate policy overhaul, retraining, and partnership with third-party auditors to ensure dignity and respect for every passenger. She paused, fingers hovering over the keyboard. Was this too much? Too little? It would be released in 10 minutes, right after the FAA's own bulletin, which would likely call for hearings and fines if the documents proved insufficient. 4:30 p.m., FAA compliance desk. The window closed. Martin Blake reviewed the preliminary analysis. Global United lacked any formal non-discrimination training for gate agents, had misfiled over 20 complaint investigations, and could produce no evidence of disciplinary action for known infractions. He tapped the intercom. Ellen, prepare the draft order. Partial reinstatement of operations only upon FAA approval of revised training curriculum, mandatory reporting of all future complaints, and quarterly compliance audits for 2 years. He sank into his chair, eyes fixed on the map showing flight corridors darkened by Global United's vanishing routes. Let them earn it back, he said softly. Let them prove they've learned. Outside, the sun was beginning to set, but for thousands of travelers still stranded in airports worldwide, the crisis was far from over. And for Global United, the real test, the hard landing, was only just beginning. Deborah, impeccably dressed in a tailored emerald blazer, smiled with practiced warmth. Emily, I am so sorry for everything you've experienced today, she began, touching Emily's arm in a gesture meant to reassure. A uniformed attendant appeared with a silver tray bearing a glass of chilled water and a small plate of lemon zest cookies. Please, help yourself, Deborah urged, her voice low and steady. Emily sank onto the sofa, clutching the glass as if it were an anchor. Each thoughtful sip grounded her, the crisp water, the faint tang of crushed mint along the rim. Deborah sat at her side, folding and unfolding her hands, careful not to crowd her. We've been reviewing every detail, Deborah continued. You have the full support of the airline's leadership. Outside the lounge, in a high-rise conference room at headquarters, a small team of major shareholders and the airline's legal counsel huddled over laptops. They had drafted the company's official apology statement, text that would be released within the hour. It offered deep regret and unreserved apologies for the incident at Gate 42, along with a goodwill voucher and an invitation to an executive-hosted luncheon. But when Deborah Lane brought Emily a printed copy to read and sign, Emily's brow furrowed. She set the statement on the low table between them, the glossy paper catching the overhead light. The signature line was accompanied by a checkbox for voucher acceptance, a $200 flight credit, and lounge access extension. Emily's fingers hovered over the pen, but then shook her head. "I appreciate the apology," she said quietly, "but I don't want a voucher." Her eyes met Deborah's, steady and clear. "I want the truth. I want them to admit there's a deeper problem here, not just one bad gate agent." Deborah's practiced warmth flickered into surprise. She glanced down at the draft. "We thought—" Emily leaned forward. "It's not enough to say sorry. This needs to be official, with promises to change policy, to retrain every frontline employee in non-discrimination, to make these files public so other airlines can see where they went wrong." A pause stretched between them as Deborah processed the demand. Then she nodded, pulling a second sheet from her folder. A new draft, headlined, "Public Statement by Emily Thompson." It laid out Emily's account in her own words, called out the airline's culture of silencing complaints, and invited every carrier in the industry to audit their training and complaint handling procedures. She placed her hand on the paper and looked up. "I'll sign this," she said, "only if it goes out exactly as written, and only if Global United releases all internal complaint logs and training materials for public review." Deborah exchanged a quick glance with the attendant. Then, with a steady hand, she slid a pen across the table. "Your terms," she agreed, voice solemn. "We'll release everything by end of day tomorrow." Emily picked up the pen and signed her name in flowing script. In that moment, the quiet lounge felt charged with possibility. Outside, passengers still fumed over canceled flights. But far beyond Gate 42, in boardrooms and regulatory offices, her signature would begin to crack the code of silence that protected discriminatory behavior. As Emily stood and handed the signed statement back, Deborah offered a genuine smile for the first time. "Thank you, Emily. We'll do better." Emily walked out of the lounge with her head held high, her glass now empty, but her resolve full, knowing that this public declaration would not only reshape Global United's future, but could spark a wave of transparency across the entire airline industry. The departure boards blinked once, twice, then went dark in a dozen terminals. What had started as a trickle of canceled notices beneath Flight UA 427's listing transformed within minutes into a tidal wave. Gate after gate bore the same red, merciless verdict: canceled. It spread from Concourse B to Z, turning the usually bustling airport into a tableau of stunned disbelief. Travelers paused mid-stride, their eyes widening as hopes of timely departures dissolved in front of them. A crescendo of groans and expletives rose through the concourse. Business people slammed palms against rolling cases. Weary families huddled over toddlers who cried in confusion. An elderly couple clutching paper boarding passes exchanged despairing looks. The terminal's PA system tried to maintain order, its recorded voice punctuating the chaos with contrite apologies and instructions to see gate agents. But its measured tones were drowned out by the roar of frustration. Passengers formed tight knots around service desks, jabbing at screens in futile attempts to rebook flights, while children tugged at coat sleeves, tears trailing down small faces. Upstairs in the executive suite, the mood was no less dire. Floor-to-ceiling windows looked out over the runways, now eerily silent. In the corner, a large electronic ticker scrolled, Global United's stock price in blazing red, down 18% at opening, then 25%. Traders on the floor of the New York Stock Exchange reacted instantly. Sell orders cascaded. The share price plummeted by double digits in seconds, erasing billions in market capitalization. Institutional investors cried foul. Headlines screamed Global United in free fall and Airline grounded by FAA. Chaos at Gate 42 sparked industry meltdown. As the chairwoman called for a vote, heads bowed in collective shame. Senior officials, once so proud in their starched uniforms and gleaming lapel pins, sat motionless, shoulders hunched. The general counsel's glasses caught the light, then slipped down his nose as he sighed heavily. Beside him, the VP of operations buried her face in her hands. No one spoke above a whisper. They understood the severity of what they had unleashed. A single eye reverberated, then another. The motion passed with heavy hearts. Their airline, built on decades of routes and reputations, now lay in tatters, brought low by a single viral spark. In his corner office, CEO Brian Holt sat alone behind an immense curved desk, gazing at the smoldering remains of the day's financial reports. The thick stack of balance sheets and forecast revisions looked more like kindling than crucial documents, each figure marked in red, each projection shattered. He ran a hand through his hair, ashen-eyed, and exhaled a slow, defeated breath. Outside his window, the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the runway in a bruised purple glow. Engines that once promised travel and possibility now stood silent in neat rows, their boarding stairs retracted, engines off. Holt's phone lay face down on the desk, its silent screen a reminder of unanswered calls from government regulators, irate investors, and media outlets demanding comment. He reached for a report titled Revenue Impact Analysis, Gate 42 Incident, and flipped it open. The numbers tumbled before him. Projected revenue losses exceeding $1,200,000,000, 0 cents. Customer compensation liabilities spiraling into the hundreds of millions. Legal reserves stretched thin. A handwritten note in the margin read, "Risk of bankruptcy if grounding extends beyond 7 days." For a long moment he sat in the hush of his office, the only sound the faint hum of the building's HVAC system. Then he closed his eyes, recalling the morning's promise, a simple apology extended to a frightened teenager, and the avalanche it had unleashed. He thought of Emily Thompson's resolute voice refusing a voucher, demanding truth. He thought of Camila Rhodes's urgent intervention, of Martin Blake's uncompromising FAA directive. He thought of the millions of eyes that had seen Gate 42's injustice and refused to look away. In that silence, the weight of responsibility settled on him like a physical burden. There would be no quick fixes, no cover-ups. The industry's fault lines had been exposed, and his airline lay at their fault's epicenter. He lifted his head, steeling himself against the enormity of what must be done. Overhaul leadership, rewrite policies, rebuild trust. The path ahead would be long, and many would doubt Global United's ability to recover. Yet in that crucible of crisis, he knew the first step was acceptance, of blame, of loss, and of the work required to earn redemption. Emily stepped onto the small stage set up in the terminal's overflow concourse. Bright floodlights aimed at the simple podium where a single microphone awaited her. Dozens of cameras turned and clicked in unison, reporters leaning forward on the ropes that cordoned off the makeshift press area. A hush descended, broken only by the faint hum of distant jet engines and the soft rustle of notepads. She paused, drawing a steadying breath. In a crisp navy blazer and white blouse, her travel-worn backpack exchanged for a leather portfolio, Emily looked every inch the poised young advocate she had become over the past few hours. Her blue eyes swept the crowd, meeting the gaze of a television news anchor and the lens of countless smartphones. Then, with clear conviction, she spoke. "I didn't destroy Crestline. Their own choices did that. I only refused to stay quiet." Her voice rang out, calm but unwavering. There was no tremor, no hint of uncertainty, only the quiet authority of someone who had lived through the moment she described. As the final syllable faded, the air seemed to hold its breath. For an instant, not a single pen moved, not a single reporter dared interrupt. Then, slowly, the change came. One by one, the onlookers rose to their feet, hands lowering from notepads and camera shutters falling silent. A ripple of respectful applause swept the concourse in almost reverent unison, the sound measured and heartfelt rather than boisterous. Even the airline executives and shareholders who had gathered off to the side paused in their hurried conversations, standing with bowed heads as Emily's words settled over them. Emily raised her chin, her shoulders squared against the glare of a dozen camera bulbs. "I want every airline to know that silence is no longer an option," she said. "If companies choose to ignore wrongdoing, they're complicit. I spoke up because too many passengers have been told to stay quiet, and that ends today." Behind the scenes, Crestline's executives scrambled to keep pace. In the company's high-rise conference room downtown, the board of directors convened an emergency session. CEO Marcus Caldwell appeared on a giant flat screen, looking gaunt and unsteady. He offered a somber apology, his voice betraying the strain of losing billions in market value within hours. But when pressed by a live journalist whether Crestline would commit to Emily's demands, to release every internal complaint log, overhaul training manuals, and submit to third-party audits, his responses were halting and non-committal. The shareholders roared their disapproval, and trading desks immediately flagged Caldwell's credibility under question. Meanwhile, regulators circled like hawks. The Department of Transportation announced a formal inquiry into Crestline's non-discrimination practices. The Civil Rights Division of the Department of Justice signaled its intention to open a civil rights investigation. FAA Director Martin Blake reiterated the grounding order. Crestline would remain earthbound until the agency certified that comprehensive reforms were in place. News headlines braced for the fallout. Crestline under federal scrutiny, airline's empire in free fall when one voice topples giants. Back in the terminal, Emily's press appearance drew to a close. She paused to thank Camilla Rhodes and Deborah Lane for their support, an acknowledgement that even flawed institutions contained individuals willing to do the right thing. Her mother squeezed her hand. "You gave them no choice but to change," she replied, "and you gave the rest of us the courage to speak up." That evening, Emily's signed statement was published in full across major news sites and syndicated in newspapers. It ran under bold headlines, framed by her signature and elegant script. Within the text, she called for an industry-wide audit of passenger service protocols, urged airlines to publish non-discrimination training materials, and invited passengers of all backgrounds to share their own experiences. The impact was electric. Advocacy groups used her statement to launch petitions. Lawmakers tweeted their support, and even competing carriers issued pledges to review their own policies. At Crestline, board members met again at midnight to finalize a roadmap for compliance. They agreed, reluctantly, to release 5 years of complaint logs, partner with an independent civil rights organization for training development, and establish a public ombudsman office for passenger grievances. Caldwell's apology video was re-edited to include explicit commitments to Emily's terms. Even so, some directors warned that the damage to Crestline's brand might never fully heal. Outside the corporate offices, protesters gathered for a candlelight vigil. Passengers who had weathered the canceled flights held signs that read, "No more silence" and "Equality above all." They raised their candles in solidarity with Emily's stand, their faces bathed in a flickering glow that cut through the night air. For Emily, the next days would bring travel to Washington. interviews with major networks, and perhaps the most daunting prospect of all, reliving her humiliation on a national stage. Yet as she prepared to board a non-Crestline flight for the capital, she felt something new under her skin, not fear, but resolve. She was no longer a passenger, caught in the currents of systemic failure. She was an agent of change. Her single act of defiance now carried on wings broader than any airline's fleet. And so, as she stepped onto the plane and felt the engines rumble to life, Emily Thompson closed her eyes and let the vibration steady her. The road ahead would be long, and the work unfinished. But in that hum of renewed purpose, she heard a future in which no passenger would ever again be told to stay quiet, and in which a single voice could still move the world. Other airlines moved swiftly in the weeks that followed Gate 42's exposé, each publicly opening its customer service policies to community input. Skyward launched virtual town halls, Coastal Wings published a draft passenger bill of rights, and Meridian Air introduced mandatory empathy workshops for every frontline staffer.